The Arizona sun scorched the earth without mercy, burning through the silence of Dry Creek like judgment from the heavens. And there, in the middle of that barren land, a man stood chest deep in a grave he had dug for himself. Thomas Bell wiped the sweat from his brow with a dirt-caked sleeve, his hands trembling on the wooden handle of the shovel. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He hadn't spoken in 3 years. 44 winters had hardened his skin, but this one, this final day, was meant to bury the last trace of who he used to be. A crude wooden cross leaned against a cracked boulder nearby. He'd carved it himself, not with love, but resignation. No name was etched into the grain, just 5 words burned into the wood. Here lies a man who gave up. The land had taken everything from him. His wife, his children, his will to keep breathing. So he came here to the place they once called home, to end it where it all began. Then it happened. A shadow passed over the edge of the grave. Then another, and another. Thomas looked up and the breath left his lungs. 5 figures stood at the rim of the grave, silhouetted against the blazing afternoon sky. Small, still, and silent. Girls, the oldest maybe 14, the youngest not older than 6. Torn dresses, dirty faces, hollow eyes that had seen too much. The oldest stepped forward, her voice steady but frayed by exhaustion. "Sir," she said, "we need your help. They're coming." Thomas stared up at them, as if he were seeing ghosts. He hadn't seen a soul in years. Not out here. Not this far from town. And now 5 orphaned girls were looking down at him. Standing at the edge of the grave he had dug for himself, and before he could speak, before he could tell them to run or ask who they were, he saw it. A dust cloud on the horizon. Fast. Riders, armed. Whatever these girls were running from had followed them straight into hell. And Thomas Bell had to decide, climb into that grave or fight like hell to matter one last time. Thomas Bell wasn't always a ghost of a man. There was a time not long ago when this land pulsed with the sound of children's laughter, when the porch of his small ranch house creaked under little feet and the scent of cornbread baking meant home. But all that had vanished 3 years ago, devoured by the fever that swept through Dry Creek like a plague. First his daughter Annie, then his boy Nathan. His wife Margaret didn't last the week after. No doctor in 50 miles. No preacher either. Just the wind, the dust, and the silence that moved in when the people he loved no longer did. So Thomas shut it all down, the barn, the house, and his heart. He buried them himself. And when the ache turned to stone, he packed away everything human and left for the far side of the property, where no neighbors could see how he wasted away. He'd survived the war, survived years of blood and screams as a battlefield medic, but nothing had prepared him for surviving peace, until 5 shadows stood at the edge of his grave. They were real. He was sure of it now. They stood quietly as he climbed out of the hole, as if unsure whether to trust the man who looked like he belonged in the ground more than above it. The oldest girl stepped forward. Her name was Emily Carter. 14, thin as a fence rail, but with a steel spine that reminded him too much of Margaret. The others followed behind her. Beth, aged 10, eyes like broken glass. Sarah, 9, walked with a limp, but never complained. Lucy, 7, clung to the hem of her sister's dress like it was armor. And Grace, the youngest, barely 6, held a matted cloth doll with a stitched-on smile and eyes full of terror. They said they'd come from Red Hollow Orphanage, some 30 miles southeast. They'd walked for 2 days across blistering desert, through thorns, over dry creek beds, with no food and little water. We ran. Emily said, her voice flat. We saw something we weren't supposed to see. Thomas didn't ask what. Not yet. Something inside him was beginning to stir, something he'd buried with Annie and Nathan. "I don't know what you think I can do," he grumbled, pulling an old canteen from the saddlebag near the tree line. "This ain't a rescue station. He handed it to Beth, who passed it to the others before taking a sip herself. Not a word. Not a thank you. Just survival instincts too old for their years. Emily stared at the grave, then back at Thomas. "Were you really going to die today?" she asked. Thomas looked away. That was the plan. Emily didn't speak again. She didn't need to. That's when the ground began to tremble. A distant rumble rolled across the land like thunder, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Dust was rising along the ridgeline. A tight column of it. Fast-moving, controlled. Thomas narrowed his eyes and counted the specks. Horses, 4, maybe 5. Riders coming hard. The girls saw it too. Grace grabbed Lucy's hand. Sarah whimpered and turned to Emily, who simply whispered, "They found us." Thomas's first instinct was to shout to send them running to make it not his problem. But his second instinct, the one that had always shown up when a soldier bled in his arms, took over. He reached for his old Colt revolver hanging by the porch post. Rusty, still loaded. "Follow me," he said, voice tight. He led them to the side of the barn, where a patch of brush covered a slanted entrance to the root cellar, forgotten by most, even him. "Inside," he said, pulling the latch. "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Emily hesitated. "We're not your problem," she whispered. "I didn't ask whose problem you were," Thomas replied. He paused, then added quietly, "But maybe you're the reason I'm still breathing." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and just like that, the war Thomas Bell had been trying to forget came riding right back to his doorstep. The hoofbeats arrived in waves first, like a whisper, then like a warning. Thomas stood just outside the barn, fingers grazing the worn handle of his Colt body, still but ready. The dust cloud was closer now, maybe a minute out. 4 riders, maybe 5. They weren't rushing like panicked men. No, they rode with the casual certainty of men who knew they had the upper hand. He knelt beside the cellar door, just one last glance at the frightened faces tucked below. Grace was clutching that broken doll, like a lifeline, her small frame trembling in silence. Lucy was crying now, quietly into Sarah's shoulder. Beth looked numb. And Emily didn't cry. She just stared up at him. "Don't come out," Thomas whispered. "No matter what you hear." He closed the cellar lid and dropped the wooden hatch over it, camouflaging it with dry brush. Then he stood, rolled his sleeves, and walked back toward the open grave. Might as well look like the loner he was supposed to be. By the time the riders came into full view, he was leaning on his shovel dirt on his hands, a cigarette tucked into the corner of his mouth, like he hadn't seen trouble coming. The lead rider slowed first. A tall, narrow-faced man with a polished deputy badge catching the sun. Too polished, too new. His name was stitched in dull brass across his chest, Deputy Carl Brenner. Afternoon, Brenner called dismounting. The other 3 followed his lead, spreading in a slow arc. Not quite hostile, but ready to be. Thomas didn't smile. "Can't say it is." Brenner nodded toward the half-dug grave. "Hope that ain't for anyone we know." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Nope, just laying old ghosts to rest." Brenner's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've been out here a while, Mr. Bell." Thomas didn't answer. Brenner's hand rested lazily on his belt. "We're looking for some runaway children. Girls. 5 of them, ages 6 to 14. Escaped from Red Hollow Orphanage 2 days back." Thomas shrugged. "Ain't seen a soul in months." That right, Brenner motioned toward the house with his chin. "Mind if we take a look around?" Thomas stiffened. "You got a warrant?" "We don't need one," Brenner said smoothly. "Red Hollow's got connections. State papers gave us full authority. Besides, you wouldn't want folks thinking you were hiding criminals, would you?" Thomas gave a dry chuckle. "Ain't nobody criminal out here but the rattlesnakes." Brenner's face twitched. Then he signaled the others. Quick sweep. Thomas didn't move, didn't blink, as the men dismounted and started walking the property. One headed toward the barn, another veered toward the back of the house. The third kicked at the dirt, checking for footprints. Thomas gripped the shovel tighter. His revolver was under his coat, but that wouldn't help much if this turned ugly. Funny thing, Brenner said, eyes drifting to the porch. You live alone. Place like this must get awful quiet. I like quiet. Sure you do, he said, voice turning colder. But see the girls we're looking for, they're dangerous. Said to be thieves. Might be carrying stolen property. Thomas snorted. 6-year-old thieves. Brenner didn't laugh. What they stole wasn't small. It was information, paperwork. Belongs to people you don't want to cross. The back of Thomas's neck prickled. That's when one of the deputies, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, emerged from behind the house. Fresh boot tracks, he called out. Small ones. Thomas stepped forward. Those are mine. Got a busted water pump out back. Had to fetch from the creek. The scarred man stared at him, but said nothing. Brenner narrowed his eyes. You sure you haven't seen anything, Belle, these girls? They've been known to lie. Might have snuck in while you were sleeping. Thomas stared him down. I don't sleep much. For a moment, no one moved. The air between them stretched tight. Then just like that, Brenner grinned. We'll be back, he said, and next time we won't be so polite. The men remounted spurs, jangling horses, snorting. As they rode away, Thomas watched them vanish into the heat, shimmer heart pounding harder than it had in years. He waited 10 full minutes before lifting the cellar door. Emily blinked up at him. Are they gone? For now. They'll be back. I know, he said quietly. The truth settled over them like desert dust. These weren't just orphaned girls. They were witnesses. And Thomas Bell had just put himself between them and the men who'd do anything to keep them silent. That night, the desert fell into its eerie stillness, the kind that felt less like peace and more like a warning. Inside the dim kitchen of the old ranch house, Thomas Bell sat at the table for the first time in 3 years. And he wasn't alone. 5 girls huddled close around flickering lamplight, their faces finely clean, though their eyes still held the weight of something unspeakable. Steam rose from chipped bowls of beans and cornbread. It wasn't much, but to them, it was a feast. Emily sat straight, watching every corner of the room, her spoon untouched. You should eat, Thomas said quietly. She didn't look up. We don't have long. Sarah sniffled beside her. Beth held Lucy's hand under the table. Little Grace kept glancing toward the window, like something was still out there in the dark. I need to know what I'm protecting, Thomas said, finally breaking the silence. Tell me what happened. Emily hesitated. Her shoulders tensed like she was bracing for a storm. Then she reached into the tattered hem of her dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal creased, scorched, and stained with dried blood. This, she whispered, is why they're chasing us. She set it gently on the table. Thomas leaned in, careful not to touch it like it might burn. The first page bore neat handwriting. Names, dates, payment records. Emily opened it slowly. Each entry more horrifying than the last. Children sold, some to ranchers desperate for cheap labor, others sent to mining camps, where kids didn't live past a few seasons. Some, Thomas's stomach turned, were listed only as special orders. No names, just prices. Beth looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. We saw Mr. Tilton kill a woman in the basement. Thomas stiffened. What woman? She had a badge, Sarah added. But not like a sheriff's. A different kind. She said she was investigating the orphanage, Emily said. Said she had proof they were trafficking us. She was going to bring it to the territorial capital. And Tilton found out, Thomas asked. Emily nodded. She gave me the journal before she... She screamed, Grace said suddenly, eyes wide. Then she didn't. Thomas leaned back, stunned. I buried soldiers during the war, he said. I saw men die every which way. But I ain't never seen children carry death like this. Emily's hands shook as she closed the journal. They didn't just kill her. They tore her room apart looking for this. That's when we ran. Thomas took a deep breath, then asked, "Who's behind this?" Emily stared at him, her words coming slowly. "Not just Tilton. He's just the face. Sheriff Drummond takes money. So does Mayor Talbot. Even Judge Carter." Thomas's blood ran cold. "Carter," he repeated. "Malcolm Carter." Emily's face hardened. "He's my father." The room froze. "What?" "He doesn't claim me. Never did. My mama worked at the courthouse. He paid her off to stay quiet. Then he paid Tilton to take me in and pretend I was just another orphan." Thomas stared at her. That steely spine, that fire, it made sense now. "And now," she said, voice shaking, "he wants me gone more than anyone." Thomas stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the desert whispered across the sand. But something had changed. This wasn't just about protecting scared children anymore. It was about standing up to men who believed they were untouchable. Thomas turned back. "We need to move." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "There's a trail behind the canyon," he said. "I used it when I ran cattle during the war. Leads to a dry riverbed and onto the ridgeline. If we stay off the main roads, we can reach Fort Whitley in 2 days." "That's federal land," Emily said. "They'll never follow us there." Thomas nodded. "It's a long shot, but it's all we got." Just then, the sound of horses returned. But this time it wasn't 4 riders, it was a dozen, maybe more. Torches flickered in the distance. Emily rushed to the window. "Too late," she whispered. "They found us." Thomas grabbed the journal and shoved it into a canvas satchel. "Girls," he said calmly to the cellar. "Now." "But we can't," Emily started. "You survived a desert. You can survive this," he said. As the girls scrambled toward the cellar door, Thomas turned to the old weapons cabinet. He pulled out a Winchester rifle loaded with dust-coated rounds that still clicked into place like they'd been waiting. He looked at the grave outside. He'd dug it for himself. Now he was about to fill it with something else. The bones of the men who dared chase children into the arms of a man with nothing left to lose. The first torch arced through the air like a comet and crashed onto the porch roof with a hiss and crackle. Flames spread fast, licking the dry wood, as if the house itself had been waiting to burn. Thomas Bell didn't flinch. He stood at the front window, rifle-loaded eyes tracking shadows through the rising smoke. 12 riders had arrived under cover of night. They moved with military precision, confident, methodical. Not bounty hunters, not lawmen. These were enforcers, killers, and leading them was Carl Brenner, back again this time, without the fake smile. "Thomas Bell," his voice boomed across the yard. "You're harboring fugitives. Come out now and no one has to die." Thomas didn't answer. He lowered his lantern and stepped away from the window. Embers crackled above his head. The house creaked. In the root cellar, the girls were huddled under blankets, their faces pale in the flickering lamplight. He'd told them not to make a sound, told them they'd be safe. But there were no guarantees anymore. Outside, the hoofbeats began to circle. One rider dismounted and started toward the barn. Another flanked left, checking the chicken coop. They weren't searching. They were closing in. Thomas raised the rifle and waited. A figure stepped out from behind the water trough, too close. He fired once. The man dropped instantly, slumping beside the post, like a discarded sack of flour. Gunfire erupted in response. Windows shattered. Lead punched through the walls, splintering wood, ripping holes in the furniture and the past. The house groaned as fire danced across the roof beams. Thomas rolled away from the window, reloaded, fired again. Another rider cried out and fell, his horse bucking wildly. "Don't kill Bell unless you have to," Brenner's voice shouted from the dark. "We need him to sign a confession." A confession? Thomas almost laughed. They weren't just here to kill him, they wanted to frame him. Blame the murder of a federal agent on a lonely, bitter rancher. Close the case, burn the truth, bury the witnesses. He moved to the back window closer to the root cellar and spotted movement. A man was circling the well, too close to the hatch. He fired, missed. Then he heard a scream, high-pitched, terrified.
Alice.
The scream came from behind the house. Thomas's blood went cold. They'd found her. Without thinking, he charged out the back door flames, curling from the eaves behind him. Smoke stung his eyes. His legs pumped through dry grass and loose gravel until he reached the clearing. There 2 men. One held Alice, the other reaching for a knife. Thomas didn't hesitate. He fired once. The bullet took the first man in the hip, spinning him to the ground. The second turned too late. Thomas tackled him, fists pounding with the rage of a father who'd lost everything and wasn't losing again. The knife clattered to the dirt. Alice ran sobbing to the cellar. Emily pulled her in, slammed the hatch closed. Thomas stood chest-heaving gun smoke clinging to his skin. He limped back toward the front, blood seeping from a graze on his shoulder. That's when he saw them, 5 more riders advancing, torches in hand. They weren't trying to kill him now. They were going to burn him out. And the house, the only shelter the girls had, was nearly gone. Inside, flames raced along the rafters. Smoke poured down the hallway like a living thing. Thomas coughed hard, shielding his mouth with his sleeve. He looked around. No escape left. No time to think. But he still had a choice. He ran to the pantry and grabbed the kerosene lantern. If they wanted fire, he'd give them hell. He smashed the lantern against the front wall, spreading flames in both directions, creating a blaze so intense that the attackers had to back off. The fire silhouetted 3 of them exposed. He fired 3 shots in quick succession. 2 went down. 1 stumbled and vanished into the smoke. But now the roof was caving in. The house groaned under its own weight. Thomas dropped to the floor and crawled toward the back. Suddenly a voice cut through the chaos. "We got the girls, all 5, someone shouted. Thomas froze. "Come out, Belle, or we start cutting throats." His hand clenched around the rifle. He'd bought them time, but not enough. He stood breathing smoke, eyes burning, muscles aching. He could barely lift his arms. Outside, Brenner's voice barked again. "You've got 30 seconds. Then we start carving names into them." Thomas's heart pounded. He reached into his boot and pulled the hidden Derringer pistol, 2 shots left. The one he'd sworn never to use, unless the moment was final. He stepped out the back door and into the firelight. "I'm here," he shouted. Brenner turned toward him, smirking. "I surrender," Thomas said, raising his hands. "But let them go." Brenner didn't hesitate. He raised his gun toward Emily. Too late, and that's when Thomas moved. 1 flick of the wrist. 2 quick cracks from the Derringer. Brenner staggered, shot through the chest, collapsing with a curse. The rest of the camp turned to chaos. The girls screamed. Thomas dove for cover. Bullets tore into the dirt beside him, and through it all, the sound of trumpets, faint, distant, but real. Cavalry, they were coming. Maybe not fast enough, but hope had just reappeared, like thunder rolling through fire. The moon was bleeding through smoke when the wagon wheels hit loose rock. Thomas grunted through the pain in his shoulder, using his good arm to help the girls climb aboard. North, he rasped to Emily. "Stay along the canyon wall. You'll find a cave 3 miles up. Dry shelter, narrow entrance, easy to defend." Emily grabbed the reins like she'd done it 100 times. She didn't argue. She just looked at him with eyes too old for 14. "What about you?" "I'll buy you time," he said. The wagon lurched forward, pulled by a terrified old mule that somehow still obeyed. Thomas stayed behind, blood soaking through the bandage on his side, breath shallow but steady. He turned back toward the ranch, now engulfed in flames, and watched the enemy regroup behind the fire. 2 riders were already galloping north to follow the wagon's trail. Thomas knew the land better than any of them. He took a shortcut across a narrow gulch, scrambling through brush and over ridgelines, lungs burning with every breath. The desert was black now, lit only by embers and the silver wash of starlight. By the time he reached the canyon, overlooked, the girls were there, trapped. The wagon had flipped over in a shallow bend, one wheel spinning. The girls were hiding behind rocks, rifles in hand, but it wouldn't be enough. 6 men had found them. Not just bounty hunters, professionals, calm, coordinated, spreading out, cutting off every exit. Thomas dropped to his stomach, scanning the ridge. He had 2 bullets left in his rifle and 3 more in his pistol. Not enough to win, but maybe enough to turn the tide. Then he saw something that made his blood freeze. Emily's dress ripped, her face bruised, and she was holding herself the way women do when they've been hurt in ways that don't leave visible wounds. They'd touched her. They'd laid hands on a child. Thomas saw red. He rose like a ghost from the rocks and fired his first shot. It struck the man closest to Emily, knocking him flat. The second shot caught another in the neck. Screams filled the canyon. Chaos bloomed. The girls took their cue. Beth and Lucy threw rocks. Sarah jabbed a stick into the leg of a man trying to climb over the boulder. Even little Grace bit the wrist of someone trying to grab her. It was a battlefield, and Thomas was a soldier again. He slid down the canyon wall, shooting, shouting, bleeding. Bullets tore past him, grazing his ribs, splitting the ground beneath his feet. And then he heard it, a voice, powerful, calm. "Drop your weapons, or the girl dies." At the far side of the canyon stood a tall man in a black coat, Silas Tilton, the monster himself. He held Emily by the arm, a gun pressed to her temple. "You've done enough damage," Mr. Bell, Tilton sneered. "One more step and I paint this canyon red." Thomas stopped, heart racing, muscles shaking. His pistol hovered midair. Emily didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just locked eyes with Thomas and mouthed one word: run. But Thomas Bell had run enough in his life. He'd run from his past, from pain, from the man he used to be. "Not tonight." "You're right, Tilton," he said softly. "This ends here." He dropped his pistol. Tilton smirked. And in that moment, Tomas pulled the small derringer from his boot, a second one hidden even from himself until now, and fired. The shot hit Tilton dead center in the chest. His body crumpled to the canyon floor's mouth still twisted in fury. But the shot ignited a final wave of gunfire. 3 men opened fire on Thomas, and he staggered backward, hit in the leg, the shoulder, and finally collapsing beside a rock. The world tilted. His ears rang. Pain bloomed like fire. But then trumpets. Real this time. Bugles, hoofbeats, shouts. The cavalry had arrived. From the canyon trail came blue coats, sabers glinting and thunder rolling through the gorge like salvation itself. Captain Benjamin Hayes led the charge, shouting for surrender. 2 of Tilton's men dropped their weapons immediately. The third tried to run and was cut down by a saber strike before he made it 5 yards. Emily ran to Thomas, sliding to her knees, hands pressed to his chest. "You can't die," she whispered. "Not now." Thomas looked up at her through blood and dust and gave the faintest smile. "Wasn't planning to," he said. "Still got work to do." She clutched the journal in one hand and his hand in the other. And for the first time in years, Thomas Bell felt something more powerful than pain. He felt purpose. 6 months later, the wind in Dry Creek sounded different. It no longer howled like loneliness. It sang soft and steady through the porch rails of a rebuilt ranch house, where 5 girls laughed under a sky the color of warm copper. Thomas Bell stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, his shoulders stiff from the bullet that nearly ended him, but didn't. The journal Emily had protected made it all the way to the territorial capital. Captain Hayes had seen to that. Within weeks, headlines spread like prairie fire corruption trafficking and a secret child smuggling ring exposed across 3 territories. Tilton's empire collapsed. So did the judges, the sheriffs, the so-called protectors who had sold out the most vulnerable. Red Hollow Orphanage was shut down. Permanently. Emily Carter, 15 now, had become the quiet leader of their small, strange family. She helped Thomas turn the ranch into something new, not a hiding place, a refuge. For the forgotten, the broken, the ones nobody else would take. Beth and Sarah started school in town. Lucy learned how to ride her laughter, filling the pasture like music. Grace still carried that stitched-up doll everywhere she went, but now its seams were repaired, like hers. And Alice never called him Mr. Bell again. She called him Uncle Thomas, and she always would. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and fire, Emily came to stand beside him on the porch. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Thomas didn't look at her. He didn't need to. "I regret not doing something sooner," he said quietly. "But no, I don't regret what I became." There was a long silence between them. Then Emily said, "You saved us." Thomas shook his head. "No," he said. "You gave me a reason to come back from the dead." He looked out across the land, once cursed with silence, now alive again. Then he said the words that had taken 3 years to find. "Some people are born to fight for their country. Others fight for their name. But a rare few find their purpose by standing between evil and innocence, even if the world never thanks them." He looked down at the small hand that had slipped into his. "And some things," he said, voice rough with truth, "are worth dying for. But even more, they're worth living for."